We are drifting through the most volatile years of the 21st century. Yet, most people are still watching the world stage through a 19th century lens. When you see American fleets looming off the Latin American coast, or sanctions choking the life out of Caracas, your instinct tells you it is just about oil, always the oil. Well, that is a half-truth that hides a much darker reality. In the old days of empires, men fought for land and bled for crude. But in the age of algorithms and digital finance, war has evolved. The powerful no longer play the role of the crude highwayman. They have done something far more brilliant, far more sinister. They created the rules of the game, and in this rigged game, they do not need to own your oil fields. They just need to force you to use the paper they print to buy back your own resources. The story of Venezuela was never about a nation bullied for its wealth. It is a bloody indictment of a rebellion against the god that rules this planet, the US dollar. This is a war between a financial order established after World War II and those desperate enough to break the fence just to survive. If you want to understand why Washington spends billions and braves international outrage to besiege a country that poses zero military threat, then you must be brave enough to look through the smoke of the oil fields and see the cold steel underneath, the absolute power of the world's reserve currency. Welcome to the invisible driver, the place for truth society doesn't want you to know. First, let us dismantle the biggest lie you have ever been told about this conflict. The idea that the United States is trying to steal Venezuela's oil for its own energy needs. Common sense would tell you that the country with the largest oil reserves on Earth must be the ultimate prize. But the truth is, the United States does not need a single drop of it. While the world was distracted by headlines of war, a quiet revolution took place right on American soil. The shale revolution. Thanks to hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, Washington transformed from a chronic oil addict into the world's leading producer. They have already surpassed Saudi Arabia and Russia. America is now energy independent and a massive net exporter of crude. So, why would they risk international condemnation and spend billions on intervention for something they already have in surplus? It makes zero economic sense. And then, there is the quality of the oil itself. Venezuela does not have the light, sweet crude that flows easily through pipes. They have heavy, extra thick sludge that looks more like liquid tar than fuel. To even begin pumping that oil again, it would cost an estimated $200 billion just to rebuild the crumbling infrastructure after years of neglect. For a pragmatist in Washington, that is not a treasure chest. That is a $200 billion liability. So, if it is not about the oil in the ground, what is it really about? The lesson here is simple. In the world of high-stakes power, the surface explanation is almost always a distraction. The real target isn't the resource you can see. It is the invisible system that controls it, which leads us to the second and far more dangerous key to this puzzle. The invisible throne. What is a reserve currency? To understand why Venezuela is being strangled, you first have to understand the invisible throne. This is the power of the reserve currency. Imagine for a moment that you own the most popular coffee shop in a small town, but you have a special rule. Nobody can pay with gold, or silver, or even by trading their own goods. If they want a latte, they must first buy a special coffee coupon that only you have the right to print. Now, because everyone in town needs coffee to function, everyone is forced to work hard, to produce real things, just to earn your coupons. The baker gives you bread for a coupon. The mechanic fixes your car for a coupon. And you just sit in the back, printing more coupons whenever you want a sandwich or a new tires. You are getting real, physical wealth in exchange for paper that cost you almost nothing to make. That is the reality of the some dollar. When Washington wants 1 million barrels of oil or a fleet of cargo ships filled with electronics, they do not have to mine for gold. They simply print the currency that the world has agreed to use. It is the ultimate God mode in economics. The United States exports green paper, and in return, the rest of the world exports its labor, its resources, and its future. The lesson is as cold as steel. The one who controls the medium of exchange controls the lifeblood of everyone else. This is a privilege that no empire in history has ever enjoyed on this scale. But an empire built on a printing press is also an empire built on a fragile promise. A promise that everyone will keep using those coupons. And that brings us to the moment the deal was signed in blood. The moment the dollar became tied to every drop of oil on the planet, the Petrodollar Pact. To find the moment this trap was set, we have to go back to the 1970s. At that time, the American economy was reeling. The gold standard had collapsed, and the dollar was losing its grip on the world. Washington needed a miracle to stay on top, and they found it in the burning sands of Saudi Arabia. In 1974, a secret deal was struck that would change history forever. The United States made an offer the House of Saud could not refuse. Washington promised to provide total military protection and high-tech weaponry to the kingdom. In exchange, the Saudis agreed to one simple but world-changing condition. They would price and sell every single barrel of their oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. And since Saudi Arabia was the king of OPEC, the rest of the oil-producing world quickly followed suit. This was the birth of the petrodollar. Think about the sheer scale of this move. Suddenly, if Japan wanted to power its factories, if Germany wanted to heat its homes, if Vietnam wanted to fuel its trucks, they all had to buy dollars first. This created a permanent, global demand for a currency that America could print at will. The dollar was no longer just backed by gold. It was backed by the very thing that makes the modern world move: energy. This pact ensured that the world would always need the dollar and that America would always be the global landlord. The lesson is clear. True power is not just about having the biggest gun. It is about making the world's most vital resource dependent on your own currency. It was a perfect system. But what happens when someone refuses to pay the rent? What happens when a nation decides they do not want to use your coupons anymore? That is when the invisible hand of finance turns into a digital noose. It is time to talk about the most terrifying weapon in the American arsenal: the weaponization of SWIFT. Most people believe that the most powerful weapon in the American arsenal is the nuclear bomb or the stealth bomber. The truth is much more subtle and much more terrifying. It is a computer network called SWIFT. Think of SWIFT as the central nervous system of global finance. It is the secure messaging system that allows thousands of banks across the planet to talk to each other and move trillions of dollars every single day. If you want to buy wheat from Canada or sell cars to Brazil, your money must pass through this digital gateway. And here is the catch. Even though it is technically based in Europe, the United States holds the keys to the kingdom. When Washington decides a country has crossed the line, They do not need to send in the Marines. They simply cut the connection. They turn off the switch. In an instant, that nation is erased from the global economy. Their banks become islands. Their businesses cannot pay suppliers. Their citizens find that their credit cards are nothing more than useless pieces of plastic. It is a digital execution. We have seen this happen to Iran. We have seen it happen to Russia. And it is the shadow that constantly looms over Caracas. The lesson we must learn is that in the age of digital finance, your sovereignty is only as strong as your access to the network. If you do not own the pipes, you do not own your own money. It is an invisible noose that can be tightened from a desk in Washington, D.C., thousands of miles away. But for Venezuela, being pushed to the brink didn't lead to surrender. It led to a desperate and dangerous act of rebellion. They decided to build their own pipes, and in the eyes of the global master, that is the ultimate sin. So, what exactly did Caracas do to invite such a relentless storm? Their crime was not just being a dictatorship. The world is full of dictators that Washington calls friends. Venezuela's deadly sin was attempting to break the omerta, the code of silence that governs the global financial mafia, trapped in a corner by sanctions. The government in Caracas did the unthinkable. They tried to sell their oil without using the US dollar. First, they launched the Petro, a national cryptocurrency backed by the country's massive oil and mineral reserves. The idea was brilliant and dangerous. If you can trade oil for digital tokens, you bypass the American banks. You bypass the SWIFT system. You render the American sanction machine completely toothless. But they did not stop there. Caracas began trading their oil directly for gold, physically flying bars of precious metal to allies like Iran and Russia in exchange for food and medicine. To the average person, this looks like a nation trying to survive. But to the architects of the global order in Washington, this is a declaration of war. It is a virus that threatens to infect the entire Petrodollar system. The American response was swift and brutal. They did not just sanction the oil. They sanctioned the gold. They threatened any company, any bank, and any nation that dared to touch the Petro. The lesson is as cold as a prison cell. In this world, you can be a tyrant, but you cannot be a competitor to the dollar. The moment you try to build a door out of the dollar trap, you become an existential threat to the United States. Because Washington knows one thing for certain. If Venezuela proves that a country can survive outside the dollar, the ghosts of the past will start to haunt the present. Ghosts of leaders who tried the exact same thing and paid the ultimate price. History is not a collection of accidents. It is a series of patterns for those brave enough to see them. When Venezuela tried to bypass the dollar, they were not the first to walk that dangerous path. They were following the footsteps of ghosts. Let us look at Iraq in the year 2000. Saddam Hussein, a man the West once supported, made a fatal decision. He announced that Iraq would no longer accept dollars for its oil, he wanted euros instead. At the time, experts laughed. They said it was a PR stunt. But less than 3 years later, American tanks were rolling into Baghdad. The official reason was weapons of mass destruction, the weapons that were never found. But the first thing the provisional government did after the fall of Saddam, they immediately switched Iraqi oil sales back to the US dollar. The rebellion was crushed. Fast forward to Libya. Muammar Gaddafi was planning something even more ambitious. He wanted to create a pan-African currency, the gold dinar. He wanted to unite the continent and sell African oil for African gold. He wanted to cut the cord with both the dollar and the euro. We all know how that story ended. Libya was turned into a failed state, and Gaddafi was hunted down in the streets. Coincidence? Some might say yes. But in the cold world of geopolitics, coincidence is a luxury that doesn't exist. The lesson is written in the ruins of Baghdad and the chaos of Tripoli. If you threaten the dominance of the greenback, you are not just a political rival. You are a target. Washington will spend any amount of money and cross any ocean to ensure the petrodollar remains the only game in town. But here is the terrifying part for the American taxpayer. The war to protect the dollar isn't just about punishing foreign leaders. It is about preventing a domino effect that could bring the entire American way of life crashing down to earth, and that is why they are so afraid of a collapse in Caracas. You might be asking yourself, why does Washington care so much about one struggling nation in South America? The answer is not about what Venezuela has. The answer is about what Venezuela represents: a virus. Washington is terrified of the domino effect. If Caracas successfully builds a backdoor out of the dollar system, if they prove that you can sell energy for gold or digital tokens and still survive, then the curtain is pulled back. The illusion of the dollar's necessity is shattered. Imagine if Iran decided to follow that path. Imagine if the nations of Southeast Asia, or even the giants of the BRICS bloc, decided that they no longer wanted to subsidize the American lifestyle. If the global demand for the dollar drops even by 20%, those trillions of green papers currently held in foreign vaults will start flooding back home to the United States. And when that happens, inflation will not just be a headline, it will be a tidal wave. The price of your groceries, your gas, your rent, everything would explode. The American middle class would be wiped out in a matter of months. This is the dark secret of our prosperity. We are not just rich because we work hard. We are rich because the rest of the world is forced to save in our currency. Washington protects the dollar in Venezuela to protect the price of bread in Kansas. They are fighting a preemptive war to keep the dollar as the only bridge between nations. But this war is no longer fought with infantry or tanks. The modern battlefield is much quieter and much more cruel. It is time to look at the new form of carpet bombing, the economic siege. In the wars of the past, we measured destruction by the number of buildings turned to rubble. But in the 21st century, the most devastating carpet bombing doesn't fall from the sky. It flows through the wires of central banks. Economic sanctions are the new siege warfare. When Washington decides to isolate Venezuela, they are not just targeting a few generals in Caracas, they are cutting the brake lines of an entire society. Imagine waking up one day to find that your nation's credit cards no longer work. Your hospitals cannot buy spare parts for X-ray machines because the manufacturer is afraid of an American fine. Your farmers cannot buy seeds because the international payment gateway has been blocked. This is a war that kills without a single drop of blood being spilled on camera. It is a silent, invisible, and agonizing suffocation in Venezuela, and we have seen the result. Hyperinflation that turned life savings into worthless paper in a matter of weeks. Middle-class families digging through trash for food while the world watches from a distance. Washington calls this applying pressure for democracy. But let us be honest with ourselves. The goal is to create so much misery, so much domestic chaos, that the people are forced to overthrow any leader who dares to defy the dollar. It is a brutal lesson in obedience. The message is clear, and if you leave the system, you leave the civilized world. You will be left in the dark, alone, until you crawl back and accept the rules. But as the pressure reaches a breaking point, something unexpected is happening. Instead of surrendering, the outcasts of the world are starting to find each other. In the shadows of the old order, a new fortress is being built, and the walls are made of Russian steel and Chinese gold. Welcome to the rise of the BRICS. For decades, Washington's financial wall was insurmountable. If you were kicked out of the dollar system, you simply ceased to exist on the global market. But in these turbulent years, the wall has begun to crack. Venezuela is no longer a lone rebel fighting a giant. It has become a frontline outpost for a new Eastern fortress. The rise of the BRICS nations, Russia, China, and their growing list of partners are building a parallel universe of finance. They have seen what happened to Caracas. They have seen the digital noose of SWIFT, and they have decided that they will never let it happen to them. China is expanding its own international payment system, the CIPS. Russia is linking its banks to any nation willing to defy the greenback. They are no longer just talking about a theoretical alternative. They are trading oil for yuan. They are trading gold for technology. They are creating a world where an American president can no longer press a button in Washington and starve a nation on the other side of the planet. This is the end of the financial monarchy. The lesson we must face is a bitter one for the West. Power, once lost, is almost never regained. The more Washington uses the dollar as a weapon, the more they incentivize the rest of the world to destroy its value. Venezuela was the laboratory, but the explosion is now spreading to every corner of the globe. The era of a single sun in the financial sky is over. We are entering a cold, multipolar dawn. So, where does this leave you? As the ground beneath the dollar begins to shift, what is the final truth you need to carry with you? It is time to wrap up this surgery of power and look at the person who matters most in this conflict. You. We have traveled a long way, from the crumbling oil wells of Caracas to the silent servers of the American Treasury. By now, the picture should be clear. The conflict in Venezuela was never just about oil, and it was never just about a single nation. It is about the very air we breathe in this modern economy. The US dollar. We live in a world where financial literacy is no longer a luxury. It is a survival skill. If you do not understand how money is being used as a weapon, then you are not a citizen. You are a passenger on a ship you do not control. The lesson of Venezuela is a warning to every single one of us. It tells us that the rules of the game can change in an instant, and that those who hold the printing press hold the ultimate power over your savings, your labor, and your future. Do not let yourself be blinded by the surface-level noise of cable news. Look for the steel core of power. Look for the invisible driver. Because in the 21st century, the greatest form of rebellion is simply knowing the truth. When you understand the game, you stop being a pawn. You become the pilot of your own fate. If this deep dive has opened your eyes, then you are exactly who we are looking for. Do not let the truth stop here. Hit the like button to help this message reach more people who are tired of being lied to. Subscribe to The Invisible Driver. And join us as we continue to peel back the layers of a world they don't want you to see. Thank you for listening. Stay awake, stay sharp, and we will see you in the next one.